What would you do if your husband laughed while signing the divorce papers only to freeze when the judge revealed you were worth more than him? On a rainy Thursday morning, Olivia Carter sat in court, her fingers clenched tightly together on her lap. They were trembling, but not from fear. No, she wasn't afraid of what was coming. She had already lived through the worst of it. Across the table, Derek Whitmore leaned back in his chair, one arm slung over the backrest with the kind of arrogance only men like him could afford. He wore a tailored grey suit, a gold watch that sparkled under the courtroom lights, and a smug smile that never left his lips. He tapped the pen twice on the wooden table before signing the divorce papers with an unnecessary flourish. Finally, he chuckled. I'm free from your dead weight. The room fell silent. Even his lawyer blinked. Olivia didn't move, didn't flinch. She had expected that. After all, she had been watching him unravel for months. The judge cleared his throat. Before we proceed, Mrs. Carter, he said, looking up, there is one more financial detail we need to address. And that's when everything shifted. Derek's smirk faltered. He blinked once. Just moments before, he had strutted into that courtroom like a man who had already won. To him, this hearing was just a formality, a final stamp on a marriage he believed was nothing more than a phase. He thought Olivia was walking out with nothing. No power, no dignity, no voice. But he was wrong. So very wrong. Years ago, when Olivia was just 22, she met Derek at a tech startup event downtown. He had big ideas, even bigger dreams, and not a single dollar to his name. But Olivia, bright, hopeful, full of love, believed in him. While Derek talked about creating apps that would change the world, Olivia worked 2 jobs on at the bank, one at a late-night diner. She came home exhausted, but still made dinner, still cleaned, still cheered him on when he doubted himself. She had dreams too. She wanted to build her own fashion label. She had a sketchbook filled with colors, fabric swatches, and designs that blended heritage with modern elegance. But when the bills piled up, Olivia put her dream aside. She sold her sewing machine. She sold her jewelry. She told herself, if he rises, we rise together. She thought that's what real love looked like. Sacrifice, partnership, faith. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that while she was lifting him, Derek was slowly forgetting who helped him climb. The first signs were small. He stopped holding her hand in public. He called her just Olivia at parties, never my wife. People saw her in the background, but never knew she was the one who stayed up with him building wireframes, editing pitch decks, and organizing his first investor meeting. When his app finally went viral, money came in like a flood. He bought watches, cars, suits, started hosting podcasts, giving speeches, getting interviewed. And Olivia? She faded into the wallpaper. People looked right through her, as if she had no story of her own. One night, at a rooftop launch event, Derek was holding court with a group of VC friends. Olivia stood just a few feet away, holding a tray of drinks because the caterers had messed up, and she offered to help. She heard one of the men ask, "Who's that?" And Derek laughed. "Oh, her! Just someone from the early days. A phase. A phase." That word burned. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true to him. To Derek, she was just someone he had outgrown. Someone who didn't match the new version of himself. He didn't see her sacrifices. He didn't remember the ramen nights, the bounced checks, the way she defended him when even his own family doubted him. And still, Olivia said nothing. Not in that moment. Not even that night. She tucked it away, filed it under things I'll never forget. But something inside her had shifted. Not shattered, shifted. A quiet fire had been lit, the kind that doesn't rage with noise, but glows steadily until it's unstoppable. That night, while Derek slept in their penthouse suite, Olivia tiptoed into a forgotten guest room, the one that used to be her creative space. She found the old laptop under a pile of old fabric samples and dusty books. When she powered it on, the screen flickered to life. And there it was, a folder named Dream Designs by Olivia. She clicked it open. Sketch after sketch, color palettes, notes, mood boards, ideas she once believed in before she traded them for stability and love. She stared at them for a long time, and for the first time in years she smiled. Not a smile of joy, a smile of recognition, of returning. In court, Derek had no idea any of this had happened. He didn't know about the late nights, the whispering self-belief returning to her bones. He had stopped seeing her a long time ago, stopped asking who she was or what she dreamed of. So when the judge asked about financial disclosures, and her attorney stood up with a thick folder in hand, and when the name Liven Studio was mentioned, he blinked. Because he had heard that name before, in passing, in podcasts, in magazines, but never connected it to her. This was no phase. She was no dead weight. She was the one who had carried it all quietly, humbly, powerfully. And now, she wasn't walking out empty-handed. She was walking out with a legacy, one built in silence, and about to speak louder than any words Derek had ever said, long before the courtroom. Long before the betrayal, long before the world knew the name Liven Studio. There was just a young woman named Olivia Carter and a man with nothing but ambition, Derek Whitmore. They met in their early 20s. He was charming, fast-talking, full of next big ideas. And she was hopeful, loving, a believer in people. Derek was trying to launch a tech startup out of a tiny apartment that didn't even have working heat. But Olivia didn't care. She saw something in him, a spark, and she thought if they held on long enough, they could turn that spark into a flame. She had her own dream too. Fashion. Olivia used to sketch for hours at night, designs inspired by her African heritage, bright colors, bold shapes, fabrics that told stories without words. She dreamed of starting a line that blended tradition with elegance. She wanted to build something of her own, but she also wanted love. And sometimes when you're young, you think you have to choose. So when Derek said, "I just need time, I need you to believe in me," she did, wholeheartedly. The early years weren't easy. They shared a one-bedroom walk-up with peeling paint and a broken stove. Olivia worked 2 jobs, one at a bank during the day, another as a night shift cashier at a grocery store. She came home exhausted but still cooked dinner, still asked about Derek's progress, still stayed up to help him rehearse pitches, tweak logos, fix slide decks. And when the rent was late, she didn't complain. She quietly sold a pair of gold earrings her mother gave her, because she believed, not just in him, but in the idea of them. "If he rises," she used to whisper to herself, "we rise." She gave and never kept score. She didn't think love needed a ledger. She passed on job offers that would have taken her across the country. She declined an invitation to intern with a designer in New York. She told herself, later, there will be time for me later. But time, as it turns out, isn't always generous to women who wait. The day Derek got his first investment, $50,000 from a local angel investor, he cried in her arms. He promised, "When we make it, I'll never forget how we started. I'll never forget you." He meant it. Maybe in that moment. But success changes people, especially the ones who think they earned it alone. As Derek's startup grew, so did the distance between them. At first, it was little things. He stopped asking her opinion, started coming home later, got irritated more easily, took calls in the other room. He became the visionary, the boss, the founder. Olivia became convenient. At dinners with investors, he introduced her as just helping with admin stuff. At parties, he sometimes didn't introduce her at all. One night, After a fancy rooftop mixer, she asked gently, "Why did you call me your assistant?" He laughed. "Babe, you know how these guys are. They wouldn't take me seriously if they knew I was tied down." Tied down. That night, Olivia sat alone in their bedroom. The bed was big now memory foam, silk sheets, perfectly fluffed pillows, but it had never felt emptier. Derek was out there living the life they used to dream about: private dinners, red carpet panels, magazine spreads. And Olivia? She was home alone, reading about his achievements on TechCrunch. The same man who once begged her to stay awake with him until 2 a.m. fixing broken code now barely looked her in the eye over breakfast. And yet, she stayed, because she remembered the man he used to be, because she thought maybe he was just overwhelmed, because she was still holding on to the we in a world where he had already moved on to me. And then came the moment she never forgot. It was a friend's engagement party, one of those lavish, showy events full of people who wore designer labels and clinked champagne flutes like they were currency. Olivia didn't fit in. But she dressed up anyway, smiled politely. She carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres because the caterers were short-staffed, and when she overheard someone ask Derek, "Who's that?" he looked at her, paused, then said, "Oh, her? Just someone from the early days." A phase. They all laughed. Olivia didn't. She stood frozen, cheeks flushed, staring down at the tray like it had just become a mirror, and what she saw was a woman disappearing. That night, something cracked inside her. Not loudly, not with screaming or slamming doors. It was quieter than that, but deeper. She lay awake and stared at the ceiling, wondering when she had last sketched something just for herself. When was the last time she created? When was the last time she felt alive? She realized she didn't even know anymore. The next morning, she found the old sketchbook. It was buried beneath a box of Derek's unused branded merchandise. She opened it slowly. The pages smelled like time. But the drawings, they still held color and soul. Her hand trembled as she traced an old design she once called Strength in Silence. She had forgotten about that one, but it hadn't forgotten her. She wasn't angry yet. Not ready to leave, not even ready to fight. But a seed had been planted, and soon it would grow. It was just another night, or at least that's how it started. The penthouse was quiet, the kind of cold quiet that sinks into the walls of a home where love has long since died. Olivia Carter lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her hands resting gently on her stomach. She hadn't slept much these past few months, not since the night he called her a phase, not since she realized she had become a ghost in her own story. That night, Derek came home late again. The door clicked open around 1:17 a.m., and Olivia heard his expensive shoes echo softly across the marble floors. No apology, no explanation. Just the soft clink of whiskey in a glass. She stayed quiet, eyes wide open in the dark. Then she heard his voice, low, confident, casual. He was on the phone, pacing the living room. At first, she tried to block it out, but something in his tone made her sit up. She slipped out of bed barefoot and tiptoed down the hallway. She didn't mean to listen. But when someone you've built your life around starts talking like you don't exist, it's hard not to want to know what they're saying. He laughed, a deep, smug laugh that once made her feel warm, now it just made her cold. "She's sweet," Derek said, "but let's be real. I deserve better now." He paused, then added, "I need a woman who actually matches my level." The words hit harder than any slap. Olivia didn't cry, didn't gasp. She didn't collapse to the floor like in some dramatic movie. No, she just stood there, motionless, weightless. Her heart didn't shatter loudly. It cracked in complete, suffocating silence, because those words didn't just come from his mouth. They came from the man she once believed would protect her heart. She walked back to their bedroom slowly, like every step was made of glass. She didn't turn on the light, didn't scream, didn't even shut the door behind her. She sat at the edge of the bed and looked around the room. The custom headboard, the untouched reading chair in the corner, the pair of wedding photos that hadn't been taken down yet. It was a beautiful prison, and she had built it brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. That night, she didn't sleep. She couldn't. Instead, she stood up quietly and walked into the small spare room, the one that used to be her creative space before Derek took it over for extra storage. Before her dreams were pushed aside to make room for his ego, she turned on the lamp. The air smelled like dust and disuse. In the corner sat an old laptop. She hadn't touched it in years. It booted up slowly, like even the machine had forgotten who she was. But Olivia hadn't forgotten. Not anymore. She found the folder labeled Dream Designs, and there they were. Her sketches, her ideas, her soul on paper. Bright colors, sharp lines, names like Rooted Grace, Unapologetic Bloom, Resilience Woven. It was all still there, waiting for her, untouched, unseen, unloved. Just like her. She sat there for hours, flipping through each design like flipping through old journal entries. Every line she had drawn was a whisper of who she used to be, who she still could be. And for the first time in a long time she felt not sad, not angry, but awake. He thought he had broken her, but all he had done was wake up the woman he had silenced. The next day, Olivia made breakfast. She said nothing about the phone call. She didn't ask where he had been. She smiled politely as Derek scrolled through emails and talked about his upcoming podcast guest, some investor from Silicon Valley. He didn't even notice that she was different, that her eyes no longer begged to be seen, that her spirit no longer waited for permission to breathe. And that's how she knew. She had already started leaving, not with her feet, but with her fire. From that moment on, Olivia lived two lives. By day, she was still the silent wife. She made coffee, folded laundry, attended events on Derek's arm, nodding and smiling like a doll. But by night, when the house went still and Derek's laughter faded behind closed doors, she opened her laptop. She began sketching again. She researched online boutiques, shipping platforms, fabric wholesalers. She learned how to code a basic e-commerce site, watched hours of YouTube tutorials, taught herself branding, SEO, digital marketing. Every night, she whispered into the silence, "I am not a phase." She didn't use her real name. She picked something new, something fierce, something powerful. Leven, a name born from her own. Olivia plus risen. It meant I was quiet. I was buried. But now I rise. She launched her first line in secret, an online-only drop. Just 5 designs. And to her surprise, people noticed. Not many. Not at first, but it started. One order. Then another. Then a message from a fashion blogger. Who is this designer? The energy. The elegance. It's unforgettable. Meanwhile, Derek was too busy laughing on his podcast, making jokes like, these so-called female founders, most of them are just playing dress-up. He didn't know the woman he was mocking, the one he said was not on his level, was sitting just a few feet away, quietly building something he could never touch. Olivia didn't respond. Not with words, not with outrage, she just kept building. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you could never be, and doing it without them. There's a certain kind of silence that comes before the storm. Not the angry kind, not the violent kind, but the kind that's steady, calculated, final. That's where Olivia Carter was the morning she decided to visit Derek Whitmore at his office. She had woken up early, not because of him, Not because she wanted to play the role of the good wife anymore, but because something inside her had shifted permanently. She was done hoping, done doubting, done wondering if she was imagining it all. She needed clarity, one last glimpse of the man he had become before she decided, once and for all, to walk away from the man she once believed he was. Olivia packed a small lunch, Derek's favorite, once upon a time. She wrapped it carefully, added a handwritten note, something kind, something that said, "I see you," even if he hadn't seen her in years. Maybe, just maybe, he would look at her differently. Maybe he'd remember. It wasn't hope, really. Just a habit. Some scars don't bleed anymore, but they still itch. She stepped into the office lobby around 11:30 a.m. Polished floors, a sleek receptionist desk, a sea of glass walls and quiet phone calls. The space was exactly like Derek. Modern, cold, impressive on the surface, but if you stood still long enough, you could feel the emptiness. Behind the desk sat a young woman, late 20s maybe, well-dressed, confident, very pregnant. Olivia had seen her before in passing, but never spoken to her. When their eyes met, the woman blinked in surprise, then slowly leaned back in her chair with a smirk. "Oh," she said, her eyes dropping to the lunch bag Olivia carried. "You're the wife." That sentence alone was enough to make Olivia's pulse shift. But then came the punch. The woman tilted her head, rested her hand on her round belly, and said, "Wow, he told me you were just his sick cousin." Time froze. Olivia didn't drop the lunch. She didn't gasp or stumble. She simply stood there. Still quiet, she stared at the woman. At the belly, at the audacity, at the truth that had been dancing around her for months, but had now walked right up and slapped her in the face. She didn't yell, didn't throw the food, didn't curse his name. She nodded, just once turned around, and walked out. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she exited. The receptionist watched her go, perhaps confused by the lack of drama. But Olivia didn't need drama. She had something far more powerful. Clarity. The cab ride home was silent. She sat by the window, watching the city rush by, people crossing streets, phones glued to ears, chasing appointments and time like it owed them something. She didn't cry. Her tears had dried months ago. What she felt now was cleaner, sharper. Like a thread inside her had finally snapped free. When she stepped into the penthouse, she didn't take off her shoes, didn't even set down her purse. She walked to the living room window, looked out at the skyline, and pulled out her phone. She scrolled to the contact she had saved, but never called. Rachel Monroe, attorney, recommended by a friend. Trusted, quiet. Discreet. She tapped the name, held the phone to her ear. And when Rachel answered, Olivia spoke with a voice that was calm, certain. "Hi. It's Olivia Carter. I'm ready now." That call changed everything. Because the woman Derek thought would never leave. She had already started walking away long before her feet moved. He just hadn't noticed. He never noticed. In the days that followed, Olivia didn't announce anything. She played her part just long enough to set things in motion. She updated her LLC paperwork, registered trademarks, filed for ownership transfers under her business alias. She spoke to an accountant, a tax lawyer, and a publicist, all under the radar. She moved in silence, not because she was hiding, but because some storms don't make noise until they arrive. Derek, meanwhile, was still living in delusion. He thought Olivia would beg when she left, thought she'd come crawling for alimony, for help, for mercy. He didn't realize she had spent 18 months building something he didn't even know existed. He didn't know Leave-In Studio had investors, a full e-commerce team, and pending partnerships with international fashion houses. He didn't know she had a silent army behind her built out of resilience, talent, and a community of women who resonated with her designs. He didn't know, because he never asked. Olivia didn't speak of the betrayal. didn't confront Derek. She didn't need to. She had already made peace with the most important truth. You can't get closure from someone who benefits from keeping you broken. She stood in the center of their living room one final evening. The home that once felt like safety now felt like a lie, with expensive furniture. She looked around at everything she had helped build, the life, the success, the image, and she realized she didn't want any of it. She didn't want the car, didn't want the house, didn't want the title, Mrs. Whitmore. She didn't want revenge. She wanted her freedom. As she began packing a single suitcase, Olivia whispered something to herself. You deserve better too. And now you're going to give it to yourself. Because sometimes the most revolutionary thing a woman can do is leave quietly and then rise loudly. Derek Whitmore walked into the courtroom like he was arriving at a press conference. Tailored navy suit, gold cufflinks, designer sunglasses he didn't bother to take off even indoors. He grinned at his attorney and leaned in. Let's just get this over with, he whispered. She's got nothing. No job, no name, no shot. In his mind, this was a wrap, a quick formality. A final stamp on a chapter he believed he had already won. After all, he'd left her with no assets, no children, no support system. And in his eyes, Olivia Carter had no identity outside of being his wife. He had underestimated her. Again. On the other side of the room, Olivia sat quietly. No makeup. No flashy outfit, just a soft grey suit, clean lines, minimal jewelry. But in her stillness, there was something unshakable. The kind of presence that doesn't beg to be seen. It demands it, silently. Her hands were folded in her lap, but they didn't tremble. Her eyes were steady. Her breath, calm, because Olivia wasn't there to fight. She was there to end. Not just the marriage, not just the silence, but the version of herself he thought would always stay small. The judge entered the courtroom and got straight to business. Formalities, signatures, standard proceedings. Derek's lawyer spoke first, rattling off boilerplate language about dissolution, division of assets, mutual consent. And then, it was Olivia's turn. The judge looked at her kindly. Mrs. Carter, is there anything you wish to disclose or submit before we finalize the divorce? The room paused. Derek turned his head slightly, amused. He expected her to shake her head. Maybe stammer a quiet, "No, Your Honor." Instead, she reached calmly into her bag, pulled out a thick folder, and handed it to her attorney. The attorney stood up. Yes, Your Honor. We have a full financial disclosure, business portfolio, and valuation documents to submit on behalf of Miss Carter. Derek scoffed. Valuation of what? Her grocery list. But then the judge opened the folder. He read in silence, turned one page, then another, and the room changed. The air grew dense. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was charged. The judge looked up slowly. Ms. Carter, he said, adjusting his glasses, can you confirm that you are the sole founder and majority owner of a business entity known as Liven Studio? Derek blinked. Once. Twice. That name. It sounded familiar? But before he could piece it together, Olivia nodded. Yes, Your Honor, that's correct, the judge continued. This business is currently operating in multiple markets, has active partnerships with global fashion retailers, and was most recently valued at $18.3 million. Derek nearly choked on his own breath. Wait, what? His voice echoed through the courtroom. The judge raised a brow. Mr. Whitmore, please remain silent while I finish reviewing. Olivia didn't turn to look at Derek. She didn't need to. She had already looked him in the eyes for years while he looked past her. Now she was letting the truth do the talking. The judge continued to read through the documents, brand partnerships, revenue reports, trademark filings, projected growth. Leven Studio wasn't a passion project. It was an empire, and it had been built under his nose, in silence, while he thought she was doing nothing. Derek leaned over to his lawyer, whispering harshly. "What the hell is Leven Studio?" The lawyer whispered back. "A fashion brand, ranked top 10 emerging labels in Forbes last quarter. 2 didn't know she owned it." Derek removed his sunglasses. For the first time that day, his hands were shaking. He turned to Olivia, as if seeing her for the very first time. "You built that," he whispered. She turned to him. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were clear. "It always belonged to me," she said softly. "You just never asked." That one sentence hit him harder than any argument ever could, because it was true. He had never asked. Not about her dreams, not about her work, not about her heart. He had assumed that if she wasn't loud, she wasn't building. He forgot that some of the most powerful storms don't make noise until they arrive. As the judge reviewed the financials, he added Leven Studio to the list of protected personal assets fully independent from Derek's holdings. There would be no claim, no alimony owed. Olivia wasn't asking for a cent, because she didn't need it. She had built her own. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. There were no cameras. No paparazzi, just a quiet street, and one man standing alone. Derek looked stunned, like someone had unplugged the spotlight he thought he'd always stand under. He had walked into court expecting to destroy her. Instead, she had let him destroy himself with his own ignorance. Olivia walked past him without pause, not coldly, not angrily. Just free. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was shrinking to fit into his world. She was walking into her own. As she opened the door to her car, her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Leven Studio just got featured in Vogue. They called it a quiet revolution. She smiled. Not for the magazine, not for the money, but for the version of herself she had finally reclaimed. Because in that courtroom, she didn't just win a divorce, she won herself back. Derek Whitmore got everything he thought he wanted. He walked out of that courtroom holding on to the penthouse, the imported cars, the investment accounts, the watches he loved to flash at networking events, even the furniture custom-made, Italian leather, perfectly curated for his image. To everyone else, it looked like he had won. But only for a moment, because what Olivia Carter took with her was something far more powerful. She took her peace. And her crown. After the hearing, people asked her, "Why didn't you take the house? You could have gotten half of everything. You let him walk away with all that? Why?" And she answered the same way every time. "Because none of that ever made me feel like home." She didn't want the walls that had echoed with silence. Didn't want the marble floors where she had stood holding a tray while being laughed at. Didn't want the bed where she lay awake at night, listening to phone calls that broke her heart. Let him keep the things. She had outgrown them. She had outgrown him. While Derek celebrated with champagne, Olivia went home to a small studio apartment she had rented quietly during the final weeks of the marriage. It had no view, no high ceilings, no sleek furniture. But it had sunlight, peace, and space for her to breathe again. She brought with her one suitcase, her laptop, a sketchbook, and one framed photo of her from years ago, laughing in a cheap sundress before money, before status, before him. That woman was coming back. For weeks, Olivia kept a low profile. No press, no public statements, no interviews. But behind the scenes, Leven Studio was rising like wildfire. Her online orders doubled, then tripled. A boutique in London requested a partnership. A fashion house in Lagos called her the next face of global heritage design. And still, she said nothing. Because Olivia didn't build her empire to prove Derek wrong. She built it to prove herself right. Derek, meanwhile, noticed the silence. He expected her to rant online. to post cryptic quotes, to try and ruin his image, but she didn't leak anything about the affair, didn't expose the lies, didn't tell the world about the baby with the secretary. She didn't need to, because the most damaging thing she could do was thrive. Without him, without a word. One afternoon, he tried to call her. No answer. He sent a text, something short, something like, "Hey! Hope you're doing okay." She read it, paused, then she deleted it. Not out of spite, but because it no longer mattered. He no longer mattered. Her silence wasn't bitterness, it was clarity, it was closure. People often think revenge is loud, explosive, dramatic. But Olivia Carter didn't throw fire. She lit a candle and walked away. She built herself a new world unstitched from every moment he overlooked her, every time he spoke over her, every ounce of strength she had to find alone. She wore her success not like armor, but like silk, soft, undeniable, regal. 6 months later, she stood backstage at a women's summit in New York. She was the keynote speaker. The press called her the Silent Storm. Vogue called her fashion's quiet revolution. She wore a custom piece from her new collection, bold colors, strong lines, unapologetically Olivia. The audience rose as she walked out. But she didn't smile for the cameras. She smiled for herself. Because there was a time when she thought she had to stay quiet to be loved, to be safe, to be enough. Now she knew better. She never needed to yell. She just needed to remember who she was. 6 months had passed since the divorce. Derek Whitmore still told the story like he had won. To his friends, it was a funny anecdote. Yeah, she walked out with nothing. Said she didn't want the house, the car, the money. Thought she was making some big statement. He laughed. They laughed. He called her the quiet one. Said she'd come back eventually, realized she needed him. Realized she couldn't do it on her own, that she had no place in the world without his last name. He still hadn't figured it out. Not really, even after everything, even after the courtroom, even after the folder. In his mind, Olivia Carter was still sitting at home somewhere, regretting everything. He pictured her scrolling through his Instagram, watching him pose with business leaders, influencers, and a different woman on his arm every few weeks. He told himself she missed the lifestyle, the private flights, the penthouse views, the power couple image. But Derek had no idea. He didn't know what she was building. He didn't know what the world was starting to say. Because while he was too busy watching himself in the mirror, the world was watching her. Live-In Studio had gone viral. Not because of controversy, not because of drama, but because of substance. Her designs, rooted in culture, emotion, and story, had struck a nerve. She wasn't just selling clothes, she was selling identity. And women across the world saw themselves in her work. She had launched collections in Lagos, New York, and London, each one selling out faster than the last. Fashion editors called her a visionary. Business magazines named her one of the top women-led brands of the year. Celebrities started requesting custom pieces, and still, Olivia said very little. No interviews, no drama, no call-outs. She just kept showing up. Quiet, powerful, unshakable. Then one afternoon, in the waiting room of a tech investment firm, Derek picked up a magazine without thinking. His mind was elsewhere, prepping for a pitch he assumed would impress everyone. He flipped through the glossy pages and froze. There she was, Olivia Carter, on the cover. Tall, elegant, wrapped in one of her own designs, bold colors, fierce structure, and soft grace in her eyes. The headline read, "The Woman They Didn't See Coming, How Live-In Studio Took the World by Quiet Storm." His throat dried. He flipped the page. There were photos from fashion weeks, quotes from global stylists praising her originality, and a feature that described her as one of the most influential creative entrepreneurs of her generation who rose not in the noise of scandal, but in the silence of self-belief. He didn't hear his name being called, didn't realize his meeting had started. All he could do was stare at the woman he once dismissed. The woman he once called a phase. The woman he told his friends was sweet but beneath him. Now she was above every room he walked into. And what made it worse, she hadn't said a single word about him, not in interviews, not online, not even in whispers. She had erased him without saying his name. And somehow, that stung more than any headline could. Meanwhile, Olivia stood in a hotel suite in Paris, zipping up her suitcase. Her assistant, Rachel Monroe, entered the room holding the same magazine. "You've seen the cover, right?" she asked with a smile. Olivia chuckled softly. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She looked out at the Paris skyline, took a deep breath, and whispered, "They thought I was quiet, but I was just focused." Because now, the world knew her name. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's past, but as her own force, her own story, her own storm. There's a kind of victory that doesn't come with fireworks. No headlines, no shouting, no "I told you so," just peace, clarity, and distance. That was the kind of victory Olivia Carter chose. She could have ruined Derek Whitmore. She had the truth, all of it. The cheating, the lies, the baby with his secretary, Tiffany Blake. The private voice messages, the receipts. She had every right to go public, to burn his brand to the ground, to make him feel the kind of humiliation he once made her swallow in silence. But she didn't. Because Olivia didn't want to destroy him. She just wanted to leave him behind. She let him keep the apartment, the one with the cold marble floors and city view. She let him keep the furniture, the car, the watch collection. She even let him keep his version of the story, because those things, they were part of a life she no longer wanted to carry. She wasn't walking away with less. She was walking away lighter. Every day since the divorce, Olivia had gotten stronger. Not louder, not more aggressive, just more grounded. Her mornings started with journaling. Her nights ended with design. And in between, she built something secret, a life where she no longer shrank herself for someone else's ego. She didn't run from her past, she just stopped letting it define her. Meanwhile, Derek kept pretending he was unfazed. He posted pictures from rooftop parties, smiled wide in podcast interviews, still threw around phrases like, "Yeah, my ex." She couldn't keep up. But every time someone mentioned Live-In Studio, every time he saw her face on a billboard or in a headline, something twisted inside him, because he knew. Deep down, he knew. She had passed him, not in status, not in followers, but in substance. He stayed stuck in the image he built. She evolved into the woman she was always meant to be. She didn't do it to hurt him. She did it because growth was the only option left. People often say the opposite of love is hate. But Olivia knew better. The opposite of love is indifference. And that's exactly what she gave him. She stopped caring who he dated, what he said, where he showed up. Because her life was no longer about reacting to his. She had moved on to better conversations, better rooms, better dreams. One day, Olivia stood in the back of a crowded auditorium as a young designer presented her first line. The girl shook as she walked off stage, unsure of how the room would respond. Olivia stood and led the applause. Later, the girl found her backstage, eyes shining. "I followed your journey," she whispered. "You gave me the courage to try." That moment meant more than any headline ever could, because Olivia hadn't just saved herself. She had become a mirror showing other women who they could be once they stopped apologizing for their light. In the end, Derek wasn't her villain. He was just a man too small to hold the kind of woman she was becoming. And Olivia didn't need revenge. She had peace, she had purpose, and most of all, she had herself. No lawsuits, no public call-outs, no need to tear him down. She didn't need to destroy him to win. She just had to outgrow him. And she did. With grace, with silence, with fire in her spirit and a crown no one could take away. In every man's life, there's a moment when he realizes what he lost. Not when it leaves, not when it walks out the door, but when it flourishes without him. When the silence grows too loud to ignore. Derek Whitmore had that moment, and it didn't come with shouting. It came in stillness. He was standing in his penthouse kitchen one night, the same place Olivia Carter used to cook him dinner after 12-hour shifts, the same counter where she used to pack him lunch with sticky notes that read, "You've got this." Now it was spotless. Sterile. Cold. He opened the fridge. Empty. That was the first time it hit him. Not the emptiness of the fridge, but the absence of care. No one was thinking of him anymore. No one was waiting up. He had everything money could buy. But the one thing that used to believe in him, in the darkest nights, through every failure, he let that go. There was a time when Olivia was his entire support system. She stayed up fixing slide decks for his first investor pitch. She helped him rehearse, even when he stumbled every other sentence. She believed in his dream before it had a name, before it had funding, before anyone else saw his potential. She didn't just cheer him on, she carried him. And now she didn't even say his name. He tried to play it cool, to laugh it off when her success came up in conversation. "Yeah, we used to be married," he'd say with a shrug, as if it didn't gut him, as if it didn't sting that she had become someone without him, better without him. But alone, it was different. Alone, the silence echoed. Sometimes he scrolled through her photos late at night. She looked radiant, not in a glamorous, manufactured way, but in a peaceful way. There was a light in her eyes he hadn't seen in years, maybe because he was the one who dimmed it. He remembered the early days, when she used to lie on his chest and whisper, "I believe in you, even when you don't." Back then, her faith annoyed him. Made him feel small, like he didn't earn it, so he pushed it away. Took it for granted, thought it would always be there. But Olivia had stopped believing in them the moment she started believing in herself again. And now, she wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't trying to make him pay. She had simply moved on, moved above him. Moved beyond him. That was the part he couldn't handle. Derek had lost money before. He had seen deals fall through, startups collapse, investors back out. But nothing had ever stung like losing her, because no amount of money could buy back what Olivia gave freely. Loyalty, vision, unshakable belief. And once she took that back, he realized he was just a man with noise. She had been the meaning. In another city, Olivia sat in the back of a black SUV, looking out the window at the skyline. She was heading to another speaking engagement, another showcase, another milestone. Her assistant, Rachel Monroe, handed her a notebook with talking points. But Olivia wasn't thinking about speeches. She was thinking about how far she had come, how much she had grown, how she had once loved a man so deeply that she forgot to love herself, and how now she no longer needed to be anyone's backbone because she had become her own. She didn't smile out of revenge. She smiled out of freedom, because the greatest thing she ever did was stop trying to be enough for someone who was never ready for a woman like her. The final chapter wasn't loud. There were no slammed doors, no last-minute declarations, no apologies. Because Olivia Carter didn't need them anymore. She didn't need closure from a man who once looked right through her. She didn't need a breakdown moment where he confessed he was wrong. She already knew the truth, and the truth was, she had taken nothing from Derek Whitmore, except her power back. Everyone had expected her to take revenge. to fight for the house, to sue for spousal support, to make him bleed for what he did. And honestly, she could have. She had the legal grounds. The documents, the betrayal, the receipts. But Olivia didn't want what he had. She wanted what was always hers, her voice, her freedom, her future. When she walked out of that courthouse, she didn't take a thing with her, not a box, not a check, not a single piece of his world. And that was the point. She didn't need to carry any of it forward, because she wasn't the same woman who had walked in. 6 months later, Liven's studio had expanded to 4 countries. Her brand was being studied in business schools. Her story had inspired a wave of women to reclaim the dreams they buried for others. She'd been invited to speak at global conferences, featured on covers of fashion, business, and women's leadership magazines. But Olivia never used those platforms to tear Derek down. She didn't have to, because the world was already watching, and the message was crystal clear. She had risen from the silence he built around her. In a quiet moment, someone once asked her, "What would you say to the man who underestimated you?" She smiled softly. "Thank you," she said, because without him, she might never have discovered just how powerful she really was. Derek, on the other hand, was stuck in a version of success that only looked good on paper. Sure, he still had the penthouse, the car, the podcast, but there was something hollow in his eyes now, a flicker of understanding that came too late. He had won the lifestyle, but he had lost the legacy, because Olivia had become more than his ex-wife. She had become a movement. Backstage at a gala in New York, Olivia stood before a mirror adjusting a pair of custom earrings made by a young black designer she'd recently invested in. The room buzzed with excitement. Tonight, she was being honored for transformational leadership through quiet power. Her assistant, Rachel Monroe, entered with a proud smile. "They're ready for you." Olivia took one last look at her reflection. Not to check her makeup, but to honor the woman looking back. The woman who once gave up everything for love, and then reclaimed it all for herself. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening. She didn't cry. She didn't preach. She just spoke one sentence. "I didn't leave with anything he gave me. I walked away with everything he never could take." And in that moment, every woman in that room stood a little taller, because Olivia wasn't just telling a story. She was giving them permission. Permission to start over. Permission to stop shrinking. Permission to choose themselves quietly, proudly, powerfully. That was her real success. Not the money, not the fame, not even the brand, but the fact that she could now look at herself in the mirror and say, "I didn't just survive him. I survived losing myself, and I got me back. No revenge, no war, just growth, grace, and a crown no one could steal again." Life lesson: power doesn't come from revenge. It comes from remembering who you are. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight, argue, or get even. It's to walk away quietly, completely, and rebuild yourself in a way that no one saw coming. That's what Olivia Carter did. She gave everything to a man who couldn't see her worth, and when he finally cast her aside, she didn't crumble. She remembered who she was before she was made small. There's a lesson here for all of us, especially those who've loved deeply and lost quietly. Your value isn't defined by who notices you or who stays. It's defined by what you carry inside, even when no one's clapping. You don't need to shout to be strong. You don't need to get revenge to reclaim your dignity. Sometimes, rising silently is the loudest statement of all, and the peace that comes with knowing you didn't destroy someone, you simply outgrew them, that peace is priceless. No matter your age, it's never too late to take your power back. Not to prove them wrong, but to remind yourself you were always enough.